Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Admissions Live. Today is Monday, February 1st, 2016, 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and I am your host, Chris Dorso. We are celebrating the start of National School Counseling Week here on Admissions Live this week. We are very excited to be a part of the National Association for College Admissions Counseling's NACAC Reads program. And we are going to talk today with Josh Steckel. Josh is one of the authors of a book called Hold Fast to Dreams, which should be required reading for anyone in the admissions world because there is just so much great stuff in here, and we're going to talk about all of that over the course of the next half an hour, 45 minutes or so. First, a little bit of housekeeping to take care of. Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. We offer viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education, such as Josh. Live webcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. Today's live viewing experience looks a little different, especially if you're watching us on watch.higheredlive.com. We are now provided that service is now provided by Maestro, which is the premier marketing tech platform for broadcasters. All the episodes of Admissions Live, if you are not watching it live, or if you loved it so much you want to watch it again, share it with your colleagues, are accessible in the video archives at higheredlive.com and in podcast format on iTunes as well. Today's episode is made possible by Chegg Enrollment Services. Chegg is the student marketing firm backed by data science, leveraging predictive analytics and innovative methods of brand building and student engagement. Chegg supports admissions and marketing efforts by focusing on students' first methods that support better outcomes from college search through career. And part of Chegg's offering for students is affordable textbook rental. So you can pop on Amazon and purchase Hold Fast to Dreams, or the book is also available through Chegg for rental. So you can rent that for just $10. So if you have not picked up a copy yet, you have some time to pick it up, and you can do that through Chegg for just $10. And I'm told there may be free Starbucks in your delivery box. So there you go. Higher Ed Live is also produced by M. Stoner, a marketing communications firm that works with higher education institutions on marketing, branding, strategy, web design, and more. Your program pages are some of the most marketing critical on your website, and your faculty has expertise that can provide a critical content pool to raise the prominence of your institution. And we'll actually be talking about that on Friday's show. But there's a two-part webinar, and there's a link that just went out that you can check out M. Stoner's webinar about content and working with your faculty better. We'll talk more about that at the end. All right, so with that, let's get to the program. I would like to welcome in Joshua Steckel. Josh has been working as a teacher and school counselor in the New York City public and private schools since 2000. And Josh is currently the college counselor at the Brooklyn School for Collaborative Studies. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm really happy to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about you and how you got to where you are. So where you are. Talk a little bit about your experience and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. I think the main thing that's is timely to say, given that it's National School Counseling Week. I think that if you'd told me when I was 18 or 19 that I was going to be a school counselor, that probably would have been a surprise to me.
Yeah.
And it's been a long and exciting road, but currently I work, as you say, at the Brooklyn School for Collaborative Studies. It's a small progressive public school. We serve kids from all over Brooklyn, but mainly from neighborhoods called Red Hook and Gowanus. We're part of a school network called the NYC Outward Bound Schools. And I do, in the schools, I do a host of work to build a college-bound culture within our school. I serve as the school's college counselor, and that's work that I've done at other public schools in the city, but also with the city public school system, and have in the last 5 to 10 years also been working to try to be involved in increasing opportunity in higher ed for all students, in terms of policy work, both at the local and the national level. And so it's been exciting work. When I was in college, it wasn't at all on my radar. It wasn't until
I've found that, folks, on both sides of the admissions table, nobody, or I should say very, very few students come up to me at the table at a college fair and say, hey, I want to be a guidance counselor when I grow up, or I want to be a college admissions counselor when I grow up. It's certainly something that you sort of realize later, I think.
Yeah, it's an opportunity that for me just kind of fell into my lap. I was teaching at a private school in Manhattan. The position opened up, and I got a really intensive training in a short period of time. And I learned a lot about college admissions, kind of on the fly. And I think that this book, Hold Fast to Dreams, it grew up out of my experience in that world, and seeing some of the ways that students who already were coming in with a lot of advantages were getting, in many ways, the most intensive supports, and that students for whom those supports generally weren't available were getting the least.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So let's talk about the book. So what made you say, now you, the School for Collaborative Studies is a relatively new educational unit. It's you sort of really created the college counseling program there, more or less. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So it's important, Chris, to know that in the New York City public school system, but really in most major urban public school systems, and certainly in many rural public school systems, there is no such thing as a college counselor. That's not a position that is included in the Department of Education's kind of budget system. At the previous school that I worked at, I was hired under a line called community coordinator, because principals have to be really creative to figure out ways to actually create this job function. And so one of the real challenges that schools face is that they're often in the position of making choices around their budgets to provide these services. And one of the points that we really want to make is that quality school counseling shouldn't be a luxury, and that quality school counseling should include work to help students get to college and be set up for success when they're there.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Quality school counseling shouldn't be a luxury, and it's certainly disappointing that it is. So what made you, in your work at the school, say, this is a story that needs to be told? We need to, I want to be able to help more people by getting this story out there.
So in ways that are really good, the conversation around access and attainment in college for low-income and first-generation students has changed dramatically in the past 5 to 10 years. There's a much more robust conversation around these issues than I remember there being 10 plus years ago. So, we wrote the book because it was our sense that the experience of many of the students that I was working with, the experience of many first-gen and low-income students, was not really visible in the larger conversations around college admissions. And that if we were going to talk for real about what equity in higher ed was going to look like, that the granular, on-the-ground experience of this demographic of students needed to be represented, and it needed to be represented in their own voices.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that really comes back and through the book. I mean, you're definitely hearing the students' voices in this book. There's no question. I mean, it's really it's told from their perspective in sometimes very heart-wrenching ways. I think it's easy to forget on this side of the desk that the way that students of color, students who don't have the financial means, are experiencing the college search process. You really, like I said, you hear that in their voices, and I think that's a real credit to yourself and to your co-author, who I want to make sure I give credit to, Beth Zasloff, for really getting a sense of who these students are.
I appreciate that.
So I do want to let's virtually meet some of the students from your book. And so right on early in the book, we meet Dwight, who is African American student who is very much caught in the middle. He's in your college planning group and your college planning class. And there's a fantastic quote that I'm going to just read straight from the book. It says, as Dwight sat in the seminar with classmates focused on their path to college, he felt his life hurtling in a different direction. Quote, what's my future, he thinks. I'm never going to have a great job. I'm never going to go anywhere. Maybe I'll be like every other black dude in the streets. I might sell drugs. I might get killed. Like that, I literally stopped. I was like, man, like that's life. That's reality to the students that we're working with, to the students that you're working with. How do we start to break that mentality of getting students making sure their voices are heard and making sure that they're getting the kinds of opportunities that they need?
That's a really hard question.
That's why I've got you on the show. Pressure.
The first point that I want to make is that in writing the book, we were also trying to capture the voices of kind of any 10 students that you might meet if you walked into a public school. And one of the reasons that we did that is because there have actually been some really terrific books and there's been some terrific journalism that follows the experience of individual students. Those individual students often happen to be almost superhuman in some really important ways. They're able to do really extraordinary things in light of like outrageous structural inequalities. And so, for us, Dwight and other students in the book, these were students that that I was meeting every day, and that and they had clearly incredible potential and talent. But it was also the case that, it just seemed like they felt like no one really knew them, like their stories weren't being heard, that no one understood, connected with, sympathized with their experience. And this was all of particular interest because this school building was located in the midst of a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York that had gentrified really rapidly over the course of the past 30 years. It's a neighborhood called Park Slope. And in many ways, the school served students from very different neighborhoods all over Brooklyn, whose experience of the city was also really different. And I think that the students felt even more isolated within this neighborhood, which was largely white and largely affluent. So, the key to supporting a student like Dwight, and one of the things that really transformed me in working with him was that he needed to be in relationships with caring adults and peers who had a clear sense of his value and a clear investment in his potential. And that needed to be a relationship that was ongoing over a long period of time. Without any kind of clear indicator of when, a switch would flip for him. And what's really powerful about Dwight's story is that there is a point in his story when a switch does flip, and it's not at all predictable. It's not clear why it happens. He associates it. He associates the catalyst with me, but I don't actually think that's entirely right. But the key is really, more than anything else, that students need relationship. And one of the things that's really hard about the state of our public school system is that there is a scarcity of qualified adults to be there for kids in the kind of intensive and often individualized way that they need.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what we said sort of at the outset about the fact that there isn't always a line for college counseling in the budget. It's not something that maybe is seen as a priority at all schools or in all districts or in all areas. And there, you hear the horror stories about New York City school counselor loads, and I don't mean to discount the rest of the country, and we'll address that question in a minute. But the horrors that we do here, because we're based in the New York area as well, about counselors with 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 students on a caseload, and you talk about building relationships and how difficult that must be for a school counselor to build that relationship with students when you've got 500, 600 students that you're trying to be responsible for. How do you get to know those students in a way that you can really directly impact, not just their educational experience, but their lives beyond that? Because it does go beyond the educational experience.
Yeah, so again, that's a really hard question. I mean, I think that I can tell you about some of the things that we do here and that have been really effective. But the bottom line is that it's ultimately not the responsibility of one school counselor. It's the responsibility of many adults within a school building. It's the responsibility of our communities, of our cities. I think that one of the really hard realities that I understood a lot more clearly was that students' educational experiences K through 12 are not going to be a kind of silver bullet to solve all of the problems that they're experiencing in their lives. That outside of school, there are really just such stark inequalities in their day-to-day experiences, and that, on both sides of the desk, as school counselors and in student services and in admissions, it's incredibly important to have an awareness of the kinds of experiences that students, of the kinds of inequalities that are defining many students' experiences. Here at school, what we do, I have 5 or 6 counseling interns from our local counselor education programs who take on a caseload. I have a group of volunteer personal essay editors who work with us every fall. We have, this year we have 2 former students, alumni of our school who work as college coaches. So what it means is that on any given day, in addition to me, I have 4 or 5 other adults who have training to support students, and it makes it possible for us, even when we're talking about 200 students or 300 students, it makes it possible for us to do more individualized work, more small group work. And I think that's really important. I think the other thing that sets our school apart and our school network apart, in the NYC Outward Bound schools, all schools have an advisory structure called Crew. Crew meets every day. Crews have a crew leader. The crew leader is responsible in many ways for getting to know a student over a very long period of time, for advocating for that student, and they're involved in ways that aren't hard to predict in the students' post-secondary choices.
Okay, so for how do you get that team together? You're talking about having, other adults on staff, alumni coming back to help, which I think is fantastic. How do you build that team for someone like yourself, who is, perhaps a one-man show, one-woman show at their school? What advice would you give to getting that kind of support system together? And I would think include teachers as well. You talk about, using the whole building. I would think having that resource would be important as well.
Yeah, it's critically important. I mean, I think that, so for example, all of the personal essay writing that our students do happens in their 11th or 12th grade English class. We have some fantastic college success units that happen in our math and economics classes. There's a massive IKEA near us in Red Hook, and our kids go there with a theory, like a pretend budget for furnishing their dorm room, and they've
Nice.
got to figure that out. I think that actually also in our English class, we have this really terrific unit where students do some sociological research to try to identify factors that impact degree attainment. And so what's happening is that the work of ensuring that students have powerful choices for continuing their education after high school is school-wide work.
Very much.
It is happening at all levels, and in lots of different kinds of ways, in instructional settings, in advisory settings, in field work. I would say that the number one piece of advice, and certainly like one of the main obstacles to scaling up this work, is that we need to have building leaders on board. It's incredibly important that school leadership at the building level, the principals and assistant principals are invested in the value of this work. And certainly having Michelle Obama on our side
Yes.
It helps a lot. It's been a very, very exciting, it's been an exciting moment to be a school counselor. It's been an exciting moment to be involved in this work, to have the White House being so loud about these issues.
That's a very, very good point. So, and actually, it sort of leads into something I was going to wait till the end, but I think it's a interesting point. So, one of the great overriding questions in the search for fit for colleges and for students is college for everybody. And I think that if you think of college as, you know, spending 4 years in a residence hall somewhere, playing Frisbee on the quad, you know, far away from home and, you know, going home for Christmas break, is that for everyone? Well, I don't know. But I think that there's the pursuit of the higher education experience, I think is crucially important for our students. And, you know, as you said, the First Lady has certainly been behind that, and having the power of the Reach Higher initiative is so very important. But you have a great anecdote that you mentioned in the I was going to say the postlude, and that's not the word I'm looking for. The conclusion to the book. So I don't know if you want to share that.
Sure. I mean, this question about is college for everybody is really, really important, and is for lots of different reasons is controversial in ways that it ought not to be. It's just a question of how we frame that question. But we tell this story in the book in order to kind of get at the tricky part of the question of is college for everybody. And the story is about when I first started working in the public schools, and one of my nephews, who was in kindergarten at the time, shared this story with his mom. The boy's name is Noah. He's like a senior in high school now, so it's a little while ago. He was in kindergarten, and he came home to his mom one day, and he told his mom that one of his peers asked him in kindergarten, "Do you know where you're going to go to college?" And I think Noah was a little intimidated, and the boy said that he knew where he was going to go to college. And so Noah came home to his mom and asked her in a very earnest way, "Do I have to go to college?" And she said, "No, you don't." And then his answer is what really stuck with me, and it was a story that I shared with kids a lot, but it also just kind of defined my work. His answer was, "Well, will you let them know I'm not coming?"
Right.
And what struck me about that is that this 5-year-old boy, in some unconscious but like real way, understood that he had a reservation, and that if he wasn't going to go, he could cancel it.
Right.
And the reason that was so important for me is that that has never been the case with the thousands of students that I have worked with over the past 10 plus years in the city schools. It is usually starkly the opposite. It is usually that students feel like in order for them to get a seat at the table, they have to move mountains. They have to be truly exceptional, and even when they are, they have to get kind of lucky. And when you ask the question, is college for everybody, and you don't take into account those enormous structural differences, you're not really asking a fair question.
Yes.
And so, you know, I think that the reality of the college admissions and higher ed landscape is that there is an enormous range of choices. And I think you're right to say that for many students, in fact, for most students, the kind of classic, typical college experience, being a residential student at a 4-year college, often it's like a small liberal arts college with like lots of grass and a quad. And
right, yeah, that's the perception. That's college. That's the way you see it.
That is, without a doubt, totally atypical of the college-bound student in America today. Most college-going students now are community colleges. A very, very large number of students are not classic, are adult learners.
Very much, yep.
There's the current college-going student just doesn't at all fit our profile of what the typical college student looks like. And what the point to be made there is, first, that there is an incredibly wide variety different kinds of college choices for students, and that it's incredibly important for them to have help in identifying the right choices, because the other critical point is that the higher ed landscape is full of really bad choices, that there are so many pitfalls, that avoiding college choices which will not offer the opportunity to move toward a meaningful degree without accruing enormous amounts of debt. All of that, the system is complex enough that for many, many families, without having an advocate and a guide to support you through the process, that it's really hard to find a good fit or a good match. In fact, I would almost go so far as to say that without quality counseling, it's impossible to find a good choice. Yeah, and then there's the fact that most students don't have quality counseling.
Right. And it's funny that you bring up the debt thing, because as you were talking there, I wrote debt and I circled it, and then like you mentioned it, it's like you're reading my mind. I think that whole specter, the looming college debt crisis, and it's not even looming, it's the current college debt crisis. There are so many angles to it. You can the mentality that it's okay to have a little bit of college debt, and that it's not necessarily a bad thing if you've got an end goal, and if you've got you're in a program and you're taking advantage of opportunities that will lead you to be able to repay that debt down the road. But that again speaks to the population that you're working with, where they are trying to come up with $50 for an application fee, or $1,500 for one of the students was saving, I don't remember which student it was trying to save up, had $2,000 ready to go, and then had a medical emergency. And so, when you're talking about students who are scattered here, so you're looking at the colleges where the sticker price is $40,000, $50,000 a year, and you're looking at 4 years of education. That's got to be just completely outside the realm of reality for so many students who are going through high school now.
Yeah, so sticker prices, including room and board, certainly top 60,000 nowadays.
Of course, yeah. And then again, it talks to the whole college concept of the traditional 4-year residential, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of things to say here. The first, we ended with the very expensive colleges, so let's start with those. The way that our financial aid system is structured, it is not meant to serve families with the highest need, right? Like, you can't have a system that's structured where like the sticker price starts at 40, 50, 60,000, and like it's our job to get it down to a place where like you can afford to go. That's going to be wrong for a ton of different reasons. Yeah. One, it's going to be wrong because there's always going to be scarcity. There's never going to be enough funds to ensure that all of the quote deserving students have the opportunity to attend the colleges that they should have choices from among. That gets into a whole other point about like helping admissions offices to think more clearly about how to read for potential among this demographic, but that's a separate question. The first is just like, if it's $60,000 to go to X college, so on my wall there I see NYU, right? So let's say that NYU, if you stay for room and board, costs $60,000+ a year. In order to make it affordable for our students to attend, the college has to be investing a significant amount in that student. And then it all shifts in a weird way. Then even when students whose families are earning between $20,000 and $30,000 a year, even when they're like, well, you have to borrow between $3,500 and $7,500 each year to attend, that's still a huge amount of money. It's a huge percentage of that family's income. And the colleges are still working from the perspective of well, but we're investing $55,000 a year in you. Isn't that terrific? So that's one issue. Then there are some pretty substantial and challenging issues around funding streams for our public university systems. And so, SUNY and CUNY are, the State University of New York and the City University of New York are incredibly important choices for the students that I work with, for all students in the New York City public school systems. At least half of my students go to a City University of New York college each year. Again, I think that what happens certainly with SUNY is that outside of a few limited pathways to admission, the maximum amount that our highest need students can get in grant funding leaves them with a bill of around $10,000 a year. And it's really substantial and it's really hard. And even through our state's opportunity programs, which are amazing and incredibly important, most families are still being asked to borrow anywhere from $3,500 to $7,500 a year. And again, the point that we want to make is that that's a really significant proportion of family income. We have seen more and more research that shows that lots of students of color's concern about employment after high school is well-founded, that they're even much more well-educated African-American students typically have a higher rate of unemployment than less well-educated white students. I think that there are lots of reasons for concern, and so the role of counseling on the high school side is incredibly important. Not just to find good fits, like what's the right place for you, but to ensure that kids have truly affordable options. That work is tremendous and tremendously important.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I know we've addressed that on the show before. On the admission side, we talk about value and the importance of because when you come to Stony Brook and you sit through one of our information sessions, we put our cost on the board and we talk about the value of public higher education and how important that is and everything. And that's not to say that value isn't important, because obviously you want to get bang for your buck, return on investment, all those great businessy kinds of terms. But the word that you use that I think is more important is affordability. And it seems so very straightforward, to be able to say, oh, well, you know what, you can get BMW, and BMW is only going to cost you, $50,000 a year. But look at how much you get for that $50,000 a year. But I can afford a Corolla, and that's the reality of where I am. There's the value in the affordability of being able to financially provide for the things that you need to provide for without incurring enormous amounts of debt and all those kinds of things. And that affordability sort of trumps value in my mind. And it's not just about, and it is about what you're getting, but it's also about being able to be able to afford it, to be able be able to wrap your head around the actual dollar value, dollar amount that you're going to be, because it's not free. And as much as we want it to be free, it's not, unfortunately. Will it be someday? Hey, we can only dream.
I think that we have really good momentum moving in that direction. But Chris, I just want to add a couple of the other pieces about affordability that are incredibly important, and particularly important for low-income students and often first-generation to college students, is that affordability not only means footing the bill, but it means getting through day to day. It means books, it means transportation, it means food. There's been tremendously important studies. A wonderful researcher named Sarah Goldrick-Rab is doing really terrific stuff around housing and food insecurity for college students at a wide range of institutions. And I think that the very strong push that we have on the college side to work toward college success, to degree attainment, to retention, we just can't forget how ridiculously hard it is to be successful as a student when you are incredibly worried about these day-to-day financial stressors. Right. Financial stressors how am I going to pay the bill for next semester, but also I'm hungry and I need to make sure that I have food for the next meal, or these things are going on at home and I really need to be able to help support. Those things have a very, very significant impact that I think without being in the shoes of the students that we're talking about in this book, it can sometimes be pretty hard to see.
Yeah, and so I want to sort of address, being in the shoes of the students that you're working with, and it's a difficult conversation to have. And, you know, we are two white guys talking about, you know, helping students of color, students who are living in poverty, trying to, you know, change their situation. How important it is for that conversation to happen across, you know, across cultural lines, across gender lines, across racial lines. It's hard not to, it's hard not to include race in the equation when you're talking about students who are, you know, students you're working with. You've got a largely non-white population there, I would assume.
Yes, as in almost all New York City schools, you know, minority students are not the minority.
Right, yes, exactly. And that reality of, you know, to talk about, again, the traditional view of the college experience, you know, being out of the quad and all that kinds of things has always historically been a very white experience. And
yep.
the importance of breaking that and being inclusive. And hang on, there was another, where was it? Mike in the book, who talks about, you know, as he's going through the financial process, that feeling that colleges were, quote, asking more than they needed to be told. Why should we know that he's the son of a single mother with a GED and who worked a job that didn't keep them above the poverty line? The language of the question excluded his experience and reinforced his sense that college was not really intended for someone like him. Like that, it was one of those situations where it's like, we don't think about that. You know, it's like, oh, we're trying to help, but, you know, are we doing it the right way? Are we using the right language? Are we, you know, are we meeting them where they are to be able to get them where they need to go, where they want to go?
Well, the key there in what you said, Chris, is that it's really, really important to meet students where they're at. And then the next step is really to try to stand with them as they walk forward. That's a really, really critical piece. And you are right also to point out that I'm coming from a position of enormous privilege, and relative to the experience of many of my students, my experiences in life, economically, personally, educationally, are very, very different. And so it became, and I made lots of errors. And it was of critical importance for students to feel like I was trying to hear them. Like, more than anything else, the thing that needed to happen for me to be able to meet them where they're at was for them to know that that I was doing my best to try to hear and validate their experience. And I think that there's a lot to be said there too for the approach that we need in a lot of student services work on campus. But to address Mike's specific issue, so the chapter that you're quoting from there for Mike's story is called "With Whom Do You Make Your Permanent Home?"
Yep.
And that is a quote of a question from the Common Application. Mike's story is about being homeless. And applying to college as a homeless student, and the experience of being homeless, and the experience of working to get through college, even as the other members of his family struggled with deep insecurity around housing. And, you know, the reason that we called that chapter "With Whom Do You Make Your Permanent Home?" was because, you know, Mike can't answer that question.
Right.
He doesn't have one. And what I learned in sitting with students, which is how almost all of this work happens when it's done right. It's this shoulder-to-shoulder experience where you are with them and you're doing the stuff that needs to get done in the application process. Not because there aren't other adults not because the other adults in these kids' lives don't care about them and don't love them and don't want the best for them, but because that's sort of what First in the Family means, is that there aren't other adults who have gone through this process before and who can't function as experts, or who don't have the resource to hire experts. And so when I went through the process with Mike, like, it was clear, question after question, you know, the experience of filling out the Common Application was not the experience of like, wow, I'm putting together this application that's going to make me a really great or not so great candidate for admission to a particular college. But the experience of filling out the application was an experience of being excluded. You know, the experience of feeling like, wow, I'm being categorized in ways that as limited my experience of the world is, I understand mean that I am like, I'm not a fit for this place, right? Like when I say that my mom has really limited education, when I say that I come from a family that's poor, when I say that I don't have any real extracurricular activities, that the most important ones are that I take care of my brothers. All of those things for Mike, and this is especially true of the family section, you know, for Mike, who is a member of a single parent household, having to like say, this is my mom, and like, no, I don't know any of this stuff about my dad. Like for him, all of those things just kind of underscored for him, like, well, maybe this isn't for me.
Yeah, and that, like that, it's soul crushing on our side, because, you know, we do try, we're trying to be inclusive, and we're trying to make sure that students are getting the opportunities. And again, it goes back to meeting them where they are and understanding how the questions that we may be asking, or how the processes that are set up. And it's not not to attack the Common App, but how the processes that exist in the admissions the admissions application world today in 2016 are not, you know, were established back in 19 whatever, and may not be reflective of society now, in the way that students, rural, urban, whatever, are need to look at their college application experience.
Yeah, and it's meeting students where they're at, or failing to do that, is not just about the Common App, Chris. I mean, like,
no, and that's why, yeah, I mean, that's why I don't want to.
Certainly, like, in term, you know, literally meeting students where they're at. You know, like, I'll tell you that I had to bang down the door of some places in order to get people to come visit. You know, like,
yes, and you see that in the book.
To get people on the phone to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't, and I don't want to either. But I do think that, in general, in the world of admissions, in the way that you say, it's been. Selective colleges in particular have in general not been structured to serve specific populations. And so there's a tremendous learning curve that we need to get moving on. Part of that, I think, is about like learning how to read certain kinds of applications effectively for potential, right? Like when you read Mike's transcript, he had like a terrible junior year, and that's not because he didn't have a good work ethic or because he wasn't incredibly smart or able. It's because he lost his home to a fire, you know? And so like that kind of work is incredibly important. The work of like, I guess you could call it customer service. I mean, like the work of like being welcoming, making students feel like they're wanted, making students understand that like, in other words, like with Mike, understanding all of the reasons coming into the conversation that he's going to feel like maybe this isn't for me, and I need to do some additional work to make him feel like this is a possibility for him. Anyway, now I'm rambling a little bit.
Right. Well, I think, and so like and I think I would hope, I can't assume, but I would hope that on our side of the table, you know, we all have those stories of students who we've been able to reach out to and to whether through contact from someone like yourself. I mean, the story that will always stick in my head was a phone call that I got from one of my high schools that I traveled to, from a very concerned counselor who had twin girls who were admitted to Stony Brook, and they worked full time in their parents' restaurant, and they didn't do extracurriculars. They didn't have time. Like they got home and they worked in the family restaurant 40 hours a week. And she was concerned that if these girls didn't go to college, that like this was their one shot. Like this was their shot at, you know, creating a better life, as they say, for themselves, to get out and to be part of the larger world. Because if they didn't go to college, they were going to work in their parents' restaurant for the rest of their lives. And not that there's not certainly value in that, in family and in supporting the community and all those kinds of things. But she, as a counselor, wanted so much for these students, and, you know, her effort to reach out to us to say, you know, what can you do for these students to help get them to where they want to be?
So, I mean, that's an amazing story of a counselor advocating for young people in a way that made a real difference. And I think that it's an awesome story. And I think also that, like, I think the hard reality is that there are probably hundreds and thousands of other students who don't have someone speaking on their behalf. And that's a problem.
That's definitely a challenge.
And, you know, I think that the counselor was also correct to say that, you know, there's something about the transition between high school and college. It's a particular kind of developmental moment when there's an opening that is much, much more narrow as kids get older. And it is absolutely true that there's these like tiny, tiny heartbreaking details that often, you know, send kids in another direction. And you know, I think that happened with some of the students in the book, and some of the students went the other way. Like I think of Nikasi, who, when she got her SAT scores back, she was done. Like I didn't see her for months. And now she's like finishing her master's degree at Columbia, and she does amazing work for educational advocacy organizations. And sometimes it's just like, it can be one adult or it can be one intervention. And the point is that it's often really hard to know what one it is, but like having those interventions can be so important, so transformative.
You talk a lot about opportunity programs in the book, you know, and at least here in New York, EOP and HEOP and SEEK in CUNY, that are so very important to helping break down those barriers and you know, get students who are who maybe don't have the resources and all of that. Speaking personally, here at Stony Brook, we get somewhere in the vicinity of 5,000 or 6,000 applications for our EOP program every year. We take a freshman class of less than 200. Well, this year's a little larger, but anyway, it's a very small group in our program, and I would assume that you know, that's a whole different set of challenges on your end, where you know, you could talk to students and say, hey, these opportunity programs exist for you, but it's probably harder to get into that program, at least here, than it is for any other program, you know, here for students who are coming in as freshmen. How can we go beyond sort of those traditional opportunity programs to reach out to students, to really to go beyond the structures that are set? It sometimes can be sort of easier said than done kind of thing. And as much as we'd love to admit everybody, we can't admit everybody. But there are great students who don't necessarily fit the mold. And how do we, and we are running way short on time. So, you know, how do we reach out to those students from a higher ed perspective? How do we approach your students in a way that, you know, that we can present a realistic option for them to get admitted, and not just to get admitted, but to be successful at our schools?
I think there's a tremendous amount to be learned from the state's opportunity programs, both on the private college side with the Higher Education Opportunity Program and with EOP, SEEK, and College Discovery at SUNY and CUNY. I mean, I think that the kinds of student success factors that exist in those programs are exemplars. And I think they're models that we want to look really closely at, to think about how to ensure that higher proportions of students are graduating across the student body, like regardless of the demographic differences that have kind of defined our conversation so far. But then again, specifically targeting those populations, because we know that, you know, the graduation rates for low-income students are terribly low relative to their middle class or more wealthy peers.
Right.
And yes, EOP and HEOP and SEEK and CD programs are incredibly, incredibly selective. And that is true of all kind of analog programs that exist all over the country, frankly. And it's one of the other kind of great misunderstandings about how the college admissions landscape functions. It's the terrible joke about affirmative action, right? Which is that, like, in fact, the pathways that are available to students who are in many ways the most vulnerable and the least advantaged in the process are the most narrow, right? Like, you know, I don't know how many, I think you said 200 students, 6,000 applicants.
Right.
Like, that's a pretty low percentage. It works the same way for like the Posse Scholarship. Like, the numbers are very, very similar. So, you know, I think one of the really kind of amazing and liberating things about counselors that I've worked with in admissions or in opportunity programs, counselors that I've worked with in admissions who are, are the liaison for the opportunity programs, is that there's a kind of liberating thing that happens as they're reading applications. They can read for lots of other kinds of things. And I think that the critical work to do on the admissions side of things is work to actually identify those metrics and those data points that correspond to greater success on your campus, right? And I think that they're non-traditional data points, right? They're not SATs. They're
Right. Very much.
They're often not high school GPA without understanding larger context about a student's life narrative. They're anecdotal pieces that are often hard to dig up without access to an adult who knows the student well. But there is really interesting work that's happening in a lot of different places, I think, to identify the characteristics of students who are thriving on specific campuses, and to let that work inform what's happening on the admissions side of thing. And I think that what EOP and HEOP and SEEK offer us are different ways to read applications to identify potential. Skidmore is a great example. Again, I don't mean to be going to private liberal arts colleges all the time. They have a terrific program where, like, in general, the students that they're admitting every year, and there are only 40, and there's going to be a ton of applicants every year, their SAT scores on average are a few hundred points lower than those of students who are admitted generally to the college, and they graduate students at an equal or a higher rate, and they're achieving on campus at an equal or higher rate than general ed students. And so there's something that they're identifying that enables them to find students who are succeeding on campus. And in addition, while they're there with them on campus, the success structures that they have in place are really ensuring that these kids are successful academically and often are change agents on campus. I wish I could tell you, like, these are 3 things that I think every school should look at. I think the hard part is that
it's funny because we just got that question and I was totally going to ask you that. So if you could wave a magic wand and make every college admissions office do one thing, what would it be? I didn't mean to throw you off. You can finish your thought. It's just funny that
it's a great question.
I got the question right before you were about to say, if there was something, there are 3 things that I could do.
Like, I wish, I should have an answer to that. What I was going to say is that I think that the college admissions landscape is so diverse and institutions are so diverse that a lot of times that answer is specific to the campus. But I do think that in a way that I think will be hard for lots and lots of institutions, thing one is I really do think that we should throw away SAT scores or ACT scores. I just don't. I think that there are so many other valuable data points for identifying potential, and I think that what SATs offer us when it comes to this particular population of students is useless. If anything, it can only serve to perpetuate the demographic inequity that exists on our campuses today, right? Where 80% of students at community colleges in our country are African American or Latino, and 70+% of students at our country's most selective colleges and universities are white, right? Like those racial disparities are stark, and I think honestly that our reliance on standardized testing, even though there's news every year about colleges that are going SAT optional, I think that that's one really significant barrier. I think that another really significant barrier is about school counseling. I think that it's on my side, right? Like, I think that there are just not, our public school systems are not structured in a way that ensure that kids have the representation, the advocacy, and the support and their families that they need to make the right choices and to have advocates who are kind of fighting for them and slowing the process down for them. And then, I don't know. I mean, there's a really, really powerful report that just came out from the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation called True Merit, which argues that there should be a quote, poverty preference in the admissions process because of all of the ways that the deck is stacked against low-income students already in the process. There are some colleges that no longer do what are called counselor calls with school counselors in order to ensure that the kids are advocated for. And, you know, I guess that I think that's a little backwards too. I think that if you're not going to do counselor calls, you should only not do counselor calls for students who are already coming in with really significant advantages, that in fact, it's the students that are underrepresented, that you should find more pathways to ensure that their stories, talents, potential are well represented. I don't think, I'm squeezing in a lot here. I don't think that,
I keep looking down the clock. I'm like,
sorry, Chris. So let me stop. I mean, but I think that there's two other big pieces of news, which is the new coalition application and the Turning the Tide report, which are important. I just think that, and we can talk about it only if we have time, but I think that they come up short in important ways for this particular population of students.
Very much agree. And you're preaching to the choir on the SAT, so it's all good. I totally understand that. I feel like every year there's several dozen students who I have to fight the SAT battle with as they're coming through the process here. Well, I am going to plug the book one more time, Hold Fast to Dreams, which is fantastic, and there's all my notes in there. And Josh, I very much appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today, and I wish you the best, and I wish your senior class the best as this crazy time of year. February 1st is one of those. I feel like every 1st and 15th this time of year is a deadline of some kind. So I certainly wish all your folks the best. And thanks, of course, as always, to our program sponsors, M. Chegg and M. Stoner. Join Erin Sapinka on Friday. She is going to talk about faculty content strategy, and she'll be talking with Peter Evans on her show on Friday, so make sure you check that. If you are in Philadelphia this weekend at the CASE District 2 conference, I will be there for that, talking about social media and finding your voice on social media and how you can have fun, even though you are an institution of higher learning, and how you can make Twitter and Facebook fun. And so I'll be presenting Sunday afternoon. So if you will be at CASE, look for me. And as always, thanks for watching. And you can reach Josh Steckel, Joshua Steckel 1 on Twitter. The book, again, Hold Fast to Dreams. Thanks for watching. This has been Higher Ed Live.